Hey everybody, welcome back. I have another video for you. If you are following on the Patreon, thank you so much for your support. If you're seeing a free video, really appreciate you considering going to the Patreon and getting access to all of the videos, all of the content for, of course, that normal subscription fee. That's the way things are done these days, and I, of course, have to go along with it. So thank you to those who are already supporting and who are considering doing that. I try to present information and analysis that you're not going to find in most other places simply because, well, when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, and generally speaking, Russia's view on the world, there are plenty of people who will give you the anti-Russian, anti-Kremlin, pro-Washington, pro-NATO perspective, and plenty of people who will give you the pro-Russian, pro-Moscow, pro-Putin, everything that Russia does is good and everything the U.S. does is bad kind of perspective, right? And those people on both sides of that divide are obviously self-interested in doing that. They make their money this way. They don't make their money telling the truth. They make their money spinning whatever narrative is most profitable for them from whatever position they're coming from. For me, this is really about making a contribution to what's going on in the struggle against imperialism, whether it is U.S. imperialism in many contexts, whether it is Russian imperialism in the context of its criminal invasion of Ukraine. So to the extent that you like or dislike some of the things you hear from me, that is okay. I am going to bring it to you as real, as honest, and as unfiltered as I can. And of course, I have my own biases, my own perspectives. I am a human being after all. But with all of that said, I will just make one final disclaimer. A couple of people told me the volume has been sort of low on the last couple of videos. I think I may have solved that by tinkering a little bit with the volume settings on this microphone and on this computer. But if the volume is still a problem for this video, I will continue working and troubleshooting that. I do appreciate you hanging in there with me. So let's talk a little bit about Russia and Turkey. And I'm going to do so. I mean, I've done this many times before, but I'm going to do so today in the context of this Dugin assassination. Dugin's daughter, Daria Dugina, having been assassinated a few days ago. That, of course, has brought a lot of attention onto this issue of Dugin. What I've talked about for 7 years now, these Dugin networks that have infiltrated the anti-imperialist politics on the left, have transformed whole segments of the left into raving lunatics, making excuses for Kremlin's war crimes, etc. So this is important to understand, but it also is important to understand Dugin because it gives us an insight into the broader question of how Russia is trying to fortify its own position through propaganda and misinformation and simply pro-Russian perspectives in other parts of the world. And today I am going to talk exclusively about Turkey. Turkey is, as I've said many times, if you watch these videos, Turkey is an absolutely critical country in the world today. Turkey's probably one of the handful of countries that can actually project power at a global scale. Turkey, remember that just as a background, Turkey has done at least 3 military interventions in the last several years in Libya, in the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict. They have moved their military into the Horn of Africa, established a major base in Somalia. They have been selling drones to various parties around the world, including in the midst of the Ethiopia Tigray war, including in a number of other examples. So Turkey is a very important country because they have a tremendous amount of influence, both in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the Middle East, and also into Central Asia, which, again, as a reminder, the peoples of Central Asia, of the former Soviet republics, etc., they are Turkic peoples. So Turkey has some cultural and sort of traditional cachet with a lot of these in a lot of these places. So I say all of that because it is important that we remember Turkey as a critical part of the I guess we could say of the calculus of Asia, and especially in the context of Russia. Let's not forget that the predecessor of the Turkish state, the Ottoman Empire, fought the Russians for a couple of centuries in a series of wars that established what we understand today to be Russia. That is where, or Ukraine even. That is where the origins of the Crimean War. That is where the expansion, the growing in the 19th century, the growing process of the Great Game, which was the competition between Russia and Britain over what had previously been Ottoman territory. The Ottoman Empire fought the Russians for several hundred years, and that historic conflict or historic tension that informs how we should understand some of the moves that we see today. Remember that Erdogan comes to power, and really, since he's come to power, has projected a neo-Ottoman outlook on Turkey and the world, which is to say that Turkey's rightful place is as the inheritor of the Ottoman Empire, that it should be projecting its power throughout the region and, in fact, really throughout the world. Erdogan has done a tremendous amount of work in that regard to help build up Turkey's ability to do just that. And so it's in that context where Russia launches the war in Ukraine that Turkey has to be understood. Turkey was swooping in to make deals with Zelensky and the Ukrainian government for a massive drone manufacturing facility outside of Kiev. Turkey is one of the premier drone manufacturing powers of the world. Turkey has at the same time facilitated these negotiations over the grain shipments. Turkey at the same time has played hardball with NATO over the accession of Sweden and Finland. Turkey has at the same time been accused of helping the Russians evade sanctions, or at least some elements of the Turkish state and the Turkish ruling class have. So there is a complicated dynamic here where Turkey is a linchpin for NATO, a long-standing linchpin of the NATO strategy and posture towards what was the Soviet Union and now Russia, and of course Turkey in competition with Russia in a number of different theaters, and I'll talk about that in a second. At the same time, Turkey is enriching itself through dealings with Russia, and Turkey is trying to play a sort of dual role, playing both sides of this increased US, UK, Europe, NATO on one side, and Russia and China on the other side, and playing the middle of both of these. That's where Turkey has been. Now, let's talk about how they do that. How does Turkey demonstrate that it plays this middle, and how does Dugin fit into all of this? Well, if you follow Turkish media, you would know that it is not unanimously in favor of the United States and NATO, despite Turkey's membership in NATO. Turkey is a longstanding member and has that as a critical sort of guarantee for itself. At the same time, Turkey has always been rather skeptical, or maybe not always, but for the last several decades, Turkey has been rather skeptical of the West and of NATO. And much of that has to do with the way that Turkey and Turkish nationalists feel they have been historically treated by their Western partners and allies and so forth. So in any event, today in Turkish media, we have a mix of narratives and a mix of messages. There are prominent outlets in Turkey that are explicitly what Dugin would call Eurasianist in their outlook. They are explicitly oriented towards Russia, towards China, towards Dugin's idea of a single Eurasian power in opposition to the Atlanticist powers of the United States, Britain, the European ruling class, NATO, etc. This is not to say that even those commentators who might be called Eurasianists want to be dominated and controlled by the Russians. Not at all. They, in fact, would like to get a piece of the Eurasian pie. That's how they see it. You have several former high-ranking military officials, including at least 2 former generals, who are appearing on a variety of outlets and have been making many of these pro-Russian arguments, that the war in Ukraine was launched because of NATO expansion, that the Russians are simply acting defensively, and on and on and on, sort of playing into a lot of the Kremlin's talking points. But we need to be specific. who is doing this and why. Why is this happening in Turkey? And then we're going to talk about the significance of that. So the most prominent individual who has been pushing a lot of these narratives is a guy named Dogu Perinsek. He's formerly a Maoist. He's associated with a number of different, interestingly, formerly a Maoist. And I don't want to get into the sectarian leftist, minutia here, but there are plenty of former Maoists who have become Eurasianists, and there's probably many reasons to interrogate why that is. But in any event, he's a former Maoist associated with the Aydınlık newspaper. The Aydınlık newspaper is renowned for publishing a variety of pro-Russian conspiracy theories and a variety of disinformation that we don't have time to get into all the specifics. You can look it up yourself. The Aydınlık newspaper is not exactly the world's most objectively truthful paper, but in any event, that is connected with this guy Perinsek, as well as the organization UWI, United World International. United World International is the think tank. The think tank is funded by Perinsek himself. It is directly connected to his sort of constellation of professional projects. UWI, the United World International think tank, is now sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury because it is understood to be directly linked to Russian oligarch Yevgeny Prigozhin. Now, Prigozhin, as we know, is the primary funder of a wide array of disinformation outlets. Prigozhin himself is on the sanctions list. His companies, his organizations are sanctioned, and included with that is this UWI. Now, there are plenty of other news, quote unquote, news outlets that are controlled by these Dugin networks that are also on the sanctions list. You may have even encountered some of them. Geopolitica.ru, that's a website I've seen a number of times. The Oriental Review, Rhythm of Eurasia, and on and on and on. We could point out many, many other similar websites, whether they're under the umbrella of Russia's Strategic Culture Foundation, whether they are loosely associated with Russia's complex web of satellite websites and other things like that. It doesn't really matter. This is what we're calling, and what I'm calling, the Duginist network. There are a wide variety of operatives, each one controlling these different outlets, all of whom kind of speak with a single and unified voice. This isn't some overarching conspiracy. We know from the documented facts. We can read the newspaper, the websites and papers themselves. We can see what kind of crap they publish, and we know who their publishers are funded by. So it's not some kind of crazy conspiracy when we point out these are all part of Dugin's network. There's a reason why Dugin's daughter, all of the websites are connected to them, all of the ones connected to their surrogates and their proxies, they are all part of this broader network, and it is well documented where that money comes from. Now, these websites and news outlets, including ones that are on television in Turkey, they are regularly featuring these pro-Russian talking heads. They have, in many ways, a lot of traction in Turkey because what they do is they push back against the narrative that is particularly promoted by several prominent former foreign ministers and former elected officials who are seen as pro-US, pro-Western, and pro-NATO. Erdogan, for his part, has long played this kind of double game when it comes to the West and Turkey's perceptions of the West, right? So on the one hand, Erdogan has never moved to break ties with the United States or NATO. He's never really threatened all that much with regard to changing Turkey's real political orientation. And at the same time, Erdogan regards the West as problematic. He regards liberalism and the notion of Western liberalism as problematic. He regards traditional values as central to his own political persona. So you can see a variety of reasons why Erdogan kind of finds himself playing both sides here. Partially it's power politics, and partially it's because he really is, on an ideological level, kind of divided here. He doesn't really side with the Russians. in most cases. I mean, we remember famously the incidents over the divisions on Syria. Putin intervenes in Syria on behalf of Assad. At the same time, Erdogan spends most of the time funneling money and resources to fighters fighting against Assad. That was one of the reasons Turkey and Russia came to very serious conflict several years ago, and an interesting aspect of what's happening today as Ukraine becomes a central question for Turkey to mediate, namely the grain shipments, and Turkey is the mediator between Ukraine and Russia. And simultaneously, Turkey finds itself trying to do business, trying to work out how they can, continue to operate in this way. So very interesting to watch Erdogan playing both sides here. Erdogan also has a tremendous skepticism towards the United States and the West over the failed coup in 2016, which he used to consolidate his power further. So on the Ukraine issue, Erdogan was mediating and trying to facilitate a deal. On the Syria issue, Putin has been the one trying to facilitate a deal between Erdogan and Assad. And this deal, of course, centers around the remnants of the Syrian war, and in particular, the Kurdish question. Erdogan would like nothing more than to liquidate the Kurds. Assad seems to be prepared to give him something like a green light. Putin would allow this so long as the Turks give him his concessions, right? All of this. And I bring up all of this because it is important to understand this sort of dance that is going on between Turkey and Russia. And Dugin, to bring it back to Dugin fit into this. Dugin's propaganda, his ideas, Eurasianism, Russian imperial revanchism, all of these ideas, they figure as part of this question. So it is useful for Erdogan to hear these kind of Duginist sentiments because they are explicitly anti-US and anti-Western, which helps shore up that flank for Erdogan. At the same time, he's able to use the growing popularity of this Eurasianist sort of outlook. He's able to use that for leverage against both Russia and NATO in his negotiations. It's a very clever position that Erdogan is taking here, basically using this to his advantage on all fronts. And I don't think that's a secret to Putin, and I don't think that's a secret to NATO. I mean, Erdogan is acting this way out in the open. Now, again, when I talk about the Duginist networks, or rather these platforms that are giving Dugin operatives and Dugin proxies this sort of platform to speak to Turkey, they are simultaneously also providing a platform to Erdogan's associates. Okay, so people that are essentially proxies for Erdogan then get on these same platforms and sometimes echo, sometimes challenge those Eurasianist sentiments, just depending on the situation, depending on the talking head, and so forth, right? So I want to just provide a little bit of a window into some of the complications of the narrative and of the propaganda in Turkey, because I think it does give us a little bit of insight into the more sort of the complexity of Turkey's position here and why it seems like it's always talking out of both sides of its mouth. Now, at the last couple of minutes of my video here, I just want to point out some of the reasons or some of the areas of Russian-Turkey friendship and cooperation on the one hand, and competition on the other hand. I already kind of alluded to it, so I'll start out with the post-Soviet space. Remember that in January, not long before Russia launched its invasion, its criminal war against Ukraine, Russia militarily intervened in Kazakhstan when there was a workers' uprising. Protests begin in Kazakhstan in late 2021. Well, not for the first time, but the first most recent wave of protests in late 2021. By January, the protests were vibrant. They were spreading across the country, and the Russians sent in the military to put down the protests and to sort of shore up the administration of Kazakh President Tokayev after the, essentially the informal ousting of former President Nazarbayev. Okay, so Kazakhstan, and the government in Kazakhstan, which saw the Russians basically saving their hide from the people of Kazakhstan, a couple of months later, Kazakhstan is not dancing to the tune of the Kremlin. If anything, Kazakhstan has moved further away from the Kremlin because, well, quite frankly, Russia is deeply unpopular among the people of Kazakhstan for the most obvious of reasons. Russia is deeply unpopular in almost every context, that is to say, in the former Soviet space. At the same time, the Chinese are not terribly popular in Kazakhstan either. Turkey, on the other hand, has much more goodwill and positive sentiment from the people of Kazakhstan. Why? They are a Turkic people. The language of Kazakhstan, which is a somewhat recent creation after years and after decades and decades of Russian being imposed, Russian language being imposed as the lingua franca, they look to Turkey for their cultural antecedents. They look to Turkey for cultural influence. They look to Turkey to help them establish and cement a national identity in the wake of all of the Russian imperialism followed by the control during the Soviet time. So Kazakhstan is a good example where Turkey and Russia really are in conflict with each other. And there's no question that Erdogan and Erdogan's people, including undoubtedly his intelligence operatives, are crawling all over Kazakhstan, making sure that the Russians are not going to be able to seize what it is that they might want to seize, the high value targets, the minerals, the oil industry, etc. So that's one example where you see Turkey and Russia in conflict. You see it also in the Black Sea. Turkey has made moves over the last several years to expand its oil and gas operations in the Black Sea. The Russians regard the Black Sea as their territory. The entirety of the Black Sea they regard as basically under Russian hegemony. So you have another conflict there, especially considering the energy crisis, the economic crisis that continues to batter Turkey, and the fact that countries all over the world are desperate to find more oil and gas, irrespective of what it does to the planet, of course. And then, we could point to many other examples. Of course, what I just mentioned earlier, Syria is an example where at one point Turkey and Russia were on opposing sides. Now they seem to be more or less dancing to the same tune. That is to say, kind of sort of looking to make a deal about the Kurds and more or less free up the Russians to focus on their Ukraine war. Simultaneously, the Russians would be demanding concessions from Turkey vis-a-vis the networks that Turkey helped to establish and fund, the various criminal gangs, and also Turkey's broader influence that Russia would like to use against NATO, against the United States, to complicate the global situation in Russia's favor. Africa is another area where Turkey and Russia are both in conflict and cooperating. I mentioned already a country like Somalia, where Turkey is a major presence, a country like Libya, where Turkey intervened in the civil war and actually was the decisive player that allowed the civil war to end before that civil war was now rekindled. Remember, the Russians were backing the CIA asset Haftar in Libya, while the Turks were backing the Muslim Brotherhood aligned government in Tripoli, or the entity that claimed to be the government in Tripoli, right? So the Turks and the Russians were at opposing sides in Libya, opposing sides in Sudan, where Russia is backing a military junta that is repressing a democracy movement in that country. And also, we should note, Russia is quite literally stealing the gold resources out of Sudan and shipping it back to Russia as a way of countering U.S. sanctions. U.S. froze hundreds of billions of Russian cash reserves, and the Russians are trying to make up that shortfall in part by stealing wealth out of Africa. Sudan is one of the main areas they're doing that. Mali is another example of a military junta backed by Russia where resources are undoubtedly being stolen. The Democratic Republic of Congo as well. For their part, Turkey is also kind of an insidious player in Africa, as I mentioned already in several examples. Turkey is also a weapons dealer, as are the Russians. So there's a lot of competition over Africa between these two. There's a lot of areas where they overlap and where they might have, I guess you could say, shared goals. That is why, and that to bring us back to this issue of Dugin, that is why when you look at Turkish media and the Turkish position in all of this, it seems mixed. It seems the messages are constantly mixed. It's not clear. Is Turkey really on the side of NATO, even though it's a NATO member? Is Turkey on the side of Russia, even though it has so many interests opposed to Russia? Or, as I would argue, is Turkey kind of out there for itself to build its own hegemonic space, to build up its own resources and to shore up its own battered economy? In many ways, Turkey is facing some of the same problems the Russians are. And that's part of the reason I think you see some of this overlap between them. Okay, I've run way long on this video. We're already at the 25-minute mark, so I'll leave it there. Go to the Patreon, patreon.com/Eric Draitser. That's where you can find all of the videos. There's so many that are just not available on YouTube. They're only there for the subscribers. I really appreciate those of you that have been supporting this work. This is truly independent political analysis. None of this Washington NATO bullshit. None of this Kremlin Putin worshiping bullshit. Just the real stuff. Come to me if that's what you're interested in. Talk to you again next time.